My name is actually Rolf Schmidt.
And
It was never changed to Smith. My dad changed his name, but he forgot to change mine. And I didn't discover that until I was 23 years old, that my birth certificate was not the same as my driver's license.
this is how you would introduce yourself?
No, I would introduce myself as Rolf Smith,
Mhm.
and I'm Rolf Smith Jr.
All right. And how you will describe yourself is one word. So when I'm introducing myself, I would say I'm Evgeny Koshlev. I'm an engineer. What you would say about yourself?
Iconoclast,
Mechanical. All right. And
or an innovator.
it's a good one. And so tell us a little bit about your childhood.
It's very happy childhood. Grew up, was born in Montgomery, Alabama, moved to Southern California when I was 3 years old, and just had lots of adventures, had a lot of freedom. Went when I was fairly young. Let's see, I went to first and second grade, kindergarten, first and second grade in a public school. Really enjoyed it. And then my parents let me choose a school, and I chose to go to a military school.
Mhm.
And I went to Southern California Military Academy from second grade until seventh grade.
So, and I know your ancestors came from Germany and Russia. How do you think it's impact yourself?
My parents' background?
Your parents and your grandparents?
Oh, well, my mother's side was very long time Southerners in the United States, Montgomery, Alabama. My mother was born there. My grandmother was. My great grandmother. One of the main streets in Montgomery, Alabama, which is the capital of Alabama, was named after the family. And my dad's side, I didn't learn a lot about my dad's side until I was maybe in 8th grade. And then he began to talk about the German side of the family. And we would get letters from Germany, and I remember one time he was sitting in the backyard with a friend of his that we'd never met, and all of a sudden he was speaking German. I'd never heard him speak German. And he was drinking a beer, and he never drank beer. And this friend of his was a lieutenant who was with him in World War I and had rescued him during a battle, came in and helped him pull his artillery out. And the man showed up, and here they were speaking German in the backyard. I was absolutely amazed. My mother's side, I was always called the Alabama boy by my mother and my godmother, and they were very proud of our history from Alabama, and we were Confederates. We were not Yankees. My mom did not like Yankees. She was a real Southerner.
So the ancestors from your mom's side, they came from England?
They came from Scotland.
Scotland.
And they settled in South Carolina originally, and then moved to Montgomery, Alabama, and had a big plantation, cotton plantation in Alabama.
So do they pass any Scotland heritage on you?
Yes, in fact, I heard stories from my grandmother and my mother about the Scottish background, and in 1980, I think we went to Scotland and visited Hales Castle, which is where my family originated, and it was exactly like the stories I'd heard from my mother and my grandmother, this castle.
So what was your impression when you went in that castle?
Well, it was pretty run down. There wasn't. It was definitely it was a small castle, and it's where the family had. That side of the family had been during the fight with the English. The Scots fought the English, and there was a pit prison, that was down in the ground, and Taya and Sophie and Kristen climbed down in this prison, and you could cut the lid on top of it. that was exactly what my grandmother had described, and she had never seen it. She had only heard about it from her mother. When I was in the Air Force, I remember exactly when it happened. It was in August of 1987, and I was in a staff meeting with some other officers, and we took a break, and I went out and sat down on a computer, and I wrote up the idea of the Office of Strategic Innovation and the idea of a school for innovators. And two of the officers who were working with me later became my partners in that firm, which I launched. I started it in 1987. I was actually thought I was going to end up working with a computer company probably in Southern California. I had several interviews, and then a man from Exxon in Houston showed up and wanted to know about innovation, because I had created an Office of Innovation, first one in the first military Office of Innovation ever. And I gave him a lot of information, and he came back another time and he said, "So what's your next assignment?" And I said, "Well, I'm not going to have a next assignment. They wanted to send me to the Pentagon, and I am not going to go to the Pentagon." So I put in my retirement papers. He said, "Well, why don't you come work with us for 90 days while you're trying to get a job with a computer company?" I said, "That sounds interesting, but I don't know anything about the oil business." And he said, "Frankly, we don't know anything about innovation." And at that point, I formed my company, signed a contract with Exxon, and worked with Exxon Marketing for a little over 4 years as a consultant, what they call a contract executive, and helped them run their innovation program. That's how the idea came up.
And can you tell us a little bit more about your experience with Exxon?
Well, yes. The first day I showed up for work, which was 3 days after I retired out of the Air Force, the man who hired me said, "Well, I've been selected to go to a school for 3 weeks. 2 of the people are on leave right now on vacation, and you're going to have to run the office while I'm gone. So whatever you want to do, do it." And that's how I started in Exxon. And very quickly, we became the innovations group in Exxon Marketing, moved all over the company. We were looking for new ideas for marketing, and then we worked with other parts of the company, with oil exploration, the refineries, all over the world. And we'd go in and we developed an innovation workshop that we would go in and help people in every kind of division in the company become more innovative and come up with innovative ideas. And that was the business that I created. There were a couple of big ones. One, they wanted to explore with the what they call the downstream, the refining part of the company, on how to come up with new business opportunities and to cut costs. And in a 3-day, what we call thinking expedition, we were able to come up with $640 million in savings and new opportunities. Because that was so successful, the upstream, which is where they explore, drill wells, try to find oil, wanted one, but they added an extra day so that we would be able to work on some of the ideas. And that one came up with $1.5 billion in savings and new opportunities, and they documented it. So that was very good. I originally tried to get them to pay me a percentage of the savings, and they said, "Absolutely not. We're going to give you a flat fee," because we'd been so successful with the first one.
And so how did you export from just working from Exxon to working with the different companies?
After 4 years, a little over 4 years, they had some new leadership come into the marketing innovations group, and they were pretty normal. The previous groups, people that I'd worked with in there, were definitely out-of-the-box thinkers, innovators, but the new ones that came in were much more traditional Exxon people, and it wasn't any fun anymore. So we moved. Our office was in the Exxon building. We moved out of the Exxon building, set up our own office, but we continued to work with Exxon on a contract, but not as much. And I immediately had work to do with Conoco, Texaco, DuPont, some other companies. And very quickly we were working with lots and lots of different kinds of companies, all interested in innovation and getting their engineers and people to think differently about how to attack a problem. Day to day, there were two things we did. One was we would work with typically with a project team or what they would call a program team, where they were stuck or they were having trouble getting any forward traction, any ideas, and we would go in and kickstart them with what we called a thinking expedition. It was 4 to 5 or 6 days long, and then we would pull back and leave them with the results of that expedition, and it was up to them to implement it. Now, quite frequently they would call us and ask us to come back in and help them again, because they tried to implement these very different ideas in a standard way, and that didn't work. The second thing we did, we came up with the idea of a school for innovators to teach people in companies how to be innovators, how to operate differently, and how to facilitate change and new ideas. And the very first one was in Midland, Texas, with Exxon production division, and it was very successful, but it wasn't long enough. So we extended it, and in a very short period of time, I think by the fourth School for Innovators, it was 6 days long. It eventually became 7 days long. We held it in Estes Park, Colorado, in the mountains, because we used rock climbing to push people to do things that they didn't think they could do, climbing 800 feet on rocks. And the results of that were very, very successful. Gradually, we started slowly, and then by the end of the week, they were way out of the box. And when somebody who's never done rock climbing at the end of the week is 800 feet off the ground on rocks, they think that they can do, when they go back, they can do anything. If they could do that, they can do anything.
So you used the rock climbing as a trigger for the people.
Yes, it absolutely was a trigger and a transformation for them. It absolutely shifted their thinking about who they were and what they were capable of doing. We also came up with a thing that we did every day in the school called Me Inc., mentally incorporating yourself as a single person company that was an innovator. And you developed your values and your vision, your strengths, your weaknesses, your strategies, your action plan. So when you left, you could go be a real innovator without any help. And that was very successful. Without that, I don't think we would have had the same kind of success we did. First thing you have to do is realize that you're thinking differently than other people. Innovators do things that other people say cannot be done. They do the impossible. And if I look back at my history when I was in the Air Force for 24 years, I constantly did things that people said you can't do it, won't happen, won't work, can't be done. The same thing's true in companies. So people who have that feeling about themselves, and they're generally sort of oddballs, they stick out, they don't fit with the rest of the group, they're already thinking different. And because they're thinking different and doing different, there's a lot of pushback against them by the society or the group or the organization they're in. And they have to be able to stand up against that. So the first thing to do would be to recognize that you personally are thinking different than other people. And you're not going to listen to other people when they tell you that can't be done. Oh, that's a good question. It was, we developed a thing called the Innovation Briefing in Exxon that went all over the company. And initially we said there were 3 levels of change. Doing the right things, doing things different, and doing things that can't be done. And as we played with that concept, it became longer. It became, first level of change was doing the right things, being effective. The second level was being efficient. The third was doing things better, improving things. The fourth was stopping doing things. And the last was doing things that were different. We played with that for a while. That was 6. And then we went to a 7th one, doing things that can't be done. And then we examined the thinking that has to go behind each one of those levels of change. And while they were levels of change, innovation is about change. It's a new and different change. So when you talk about change, you're really talking about innovation. Innovation is a scary word for people in normal organizations because it immediately implies that they're going to have to change and do things differently, and that's a little scary. So we shifted from talking about doing things differently to thinking differently. And we found that almost everybody is interested in learning how to think differently. They don't connect that with the idea that it's going to change things or with innovation, which are 2 words that are a little bit scary for most people. So getting into thinking about thinking and thinking different was a big breakthrough. Well, when I was a kid in high school, my mom wanted to be a writer. And she signed up for a writing course and took a writing course by correspondence. And I always wanted to write a book. And I belonged to a group called the Houston Executive Club in Houston for quite a few years. We met every Monday in the morning for breakfast. And I was talking about writing a book one time, and one of the members was a part owner in a publishing company in Dallas. He said, "Why don't we go up to Dallas and we'll talk to the publishing company?" So I went up with him and met with them, and they were very interested in what I had to say. We gave them a presentation. 2 of my partners were with me on what we actually were doing, and we were on the way to Estes Park, Colorado, to run a school for innovators. So I basically ran them through that presentation, and the publisher said, "I see 5 books in here, 5 different books, but the one that I see the best potential for is this 7 levels of change. So let's work on that." And he said, "I'm going to get you a writer who will work with you on how to write this because you're busy." And he said, "Don't you want to be a new bestseller and make a lot of money?" And I said, no, I just want to write this book. And as a result of the fact that I wasn't interested in the fame of it, like Stephen Covey with his 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, I was able to get a much higher commission or percentage on the book than is normally offered. Then we got behind on the schedule, and that's when he brought in this writer, and I gave the writer, the editor, and the publisher all a personality test to see if I even wanted to work with them. And that helped me quite a bit. So the way we worked it is every morning at 10 o'clock, the writer would call me, and I would talk for an hour about a chapter. She would record it, and then by 2 o'clock, she would send the transcript of what I'd said back to me, and I would edit it, send it back to her, and we'd do it one more time, and we'd have a pretty good cut at a chapter. So it moved very rapidly doing that. And it surprised me how fast we could actually do it working in a team like that. When people began reading the book, they said, "Wow, this sounds exactly like when you're in the School for Innovators or if you're running a thinking expedition. I can hear your voice in this book." So we thought it was pretty successful.
Really?
There's one by Gifford Pinchot called Entrepreneuring. That's being an innovator within companies, and that's where we started. It didn't work real well, but it's the concept in that book is important for a young innovator. There's a lot of books out on creativity and innovation, but I would say if you want to start a business, just start it. I have no business plan. I never had a business plan. The first thing you're supposed to do if you form a business is write a business plan. Never did that. You're supposed to have, now what you absolutely have to have is customers before you start a business. You don't start a business and then go look for customers. You find some customers and start a business that those customers want. That would be my advice. Yes, a couple of mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
When I got out of the Air Force, I said, I'm never going to have anybody work for me again. I don't want it to be supervising anybody, telling people what to do. My deputy, when I was in the Air Force, went to school when he retired a year before I did, and then he joined up with me. And with him, he wasn't an employee, he was a partner. He wasn't somebody who had to tell what to do, he knew what to do. We eventually grew to about 12 people, and that didn't work. It just was too much to manage, too many people, so we cut it way back down to where there was only 3 of us. And that would be my advice. If you form a company, find 1 or 2 other people who like the same thing you like, what you want to do, who are passionate about it, and form a company around that. But it has to be something that you really are passionate about and you really believe in. And innovation is the core of what I do. But beneath that core, what makes it work is the idea of thinking about your thinking and thinking different. And that really connects with people. Where innovation scares them sometimes. We're in the 4th edition. I don't know, maybe 40,000, something like that. I don't, that's not important to me. My family was very supportive. My son, who's the oldest, my oldest daughter, my next daughter, second daughter, my third daughter, are all graduates of the School for Innovators. So they went through. It profoundly affected them, changed their lives. They got different jobs, different careers as a result of it. So I saw the impact of what I was doing on my own family. And then, of course, because it affected them that positively, they were big supporters. My oldest daughter worked with me for 3.5 years. Her husband, my son-in-law, worked with me for 2 years in England and in South Africa. So my family was very supportive, and what I did impacted them very positively. Perfect happiness?
Yes.
Wow. I would have to think about that, Virginia. I'm extremely happy now. I've been happy almost all my life. I've been married 40-some years. Very happy, very happily married. That's a big part of it. So I would say perfect happiness is having the perfect wife, being happy with what you're doing, love what you do, and don't worry about things. My philosophy is pretty much whatever happens is exactly what's supposed to happen. That's a good question. I'm going to have to think on that longer. My greatest fear. I don't know. Exaggeration, I would say. I sometimes will really exaggerate things. And in the extreme, exaggeration can be lying. You just make something up.
And what about others? What trait do you most deplore in others?
Narcissism, I would say. Narcissism and lying. I don't have much tolerance for that. Narcissism is where you think you know everything, you're the most important person there is, and you don't take much input or listen to other people. I'd say Jesus in a second. Or God in the burning bush. I'd take either one of those.
All right.
That would be fascinating. Any talent?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to speak Russian, Spanish, French fluently,
All right. So languages.
and Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know more languages because I think if you know more languages, you think very differently. You can put on a whole different way of
Mhm.
thinking about things with the perspectives of the different languages and the different cultures behind them. Sure, Bernard Cornwell is one. Who he wrote the Richard Sharp series and historical fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely Wilbur Smith, who is a South African writer, wrote a series of books about the Boers in the early settlements of South Africa and up to the present. Those are two definite of my favorite writers. I've read some of their books 3 times. And one of them, he has a series of 22 books, and I've read all 22 at least 3 times.
Really good.
Another would be Forrester, C.S.
Mhm.
Forrester, who wrote the Horatio Hornblower series, again about the British Navy and the Napoleonic Wars. Glad I'm here. Glad I'm here.
Really good. It's been.
That's a be very interesting one. I'm glad I'm here. Where where's Julie?
Alright, so it's been Rolf Smith with us. Thank you for watching.